The sermon is shepherds, sheep, goats, and wolves. Now, don't fool yourself. We all do a little fooling. We all squirt that foo-foo under our arms because we want to fool everybody, because we all smell the way we really smell. You couldn't pack us all in this room. We couldn't stay. So we all do a little fooling. But the biggest fool in town is the person who fools themselves. So I want you to be honest. I'm going to do a little teaching today. Now, John 10, Jesus is speaking, and he says, Verily, verily, I say unto you, verse 1, He that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. He calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. When he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them. He leads them, in other words. And the sheep follow him, for they know his voice, and a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any depth. I just want to tell you. The shepherds out in the field take their sheep out in the field during the day. At night, they would bring them into the sheepfold. And there was a porter, what was called a porter. He was a guard. He stood at the gate, and they all put their sheep in the same fold, all the shepherds. And the porter watched over them. When it was time to take them out, the shepherd would go to the porter or to the guard at the gate, and the porter would let him enter in. And he would enter in, and he would call his sheep by name. And the sheep, recognizing his voice, his sheep would come out and follow him. But if someone climbed over the wall, they tried to go in any way other than the door, they were a thief and a robber. Now, I'm not going to dwell with that too much right now. We may come back to it in a little bit. In Matthew 25, verse 31 through 34, Jesus said that in his flock there were sheep and goats. And when he comes back in his glory, he will separate the sheep and the goats. In Acts 20, verse 28 through 30, Paul warns the elder that they beware of wolves that enter in among the sheep. So you have sheep, goats, and wolves. Now, Jesus said he would, when he comes back in his glory, separate the sheep and the goats. It's not our job to separate sheep and goats. That's his job. It's sort of like the wheat and the tares. The man sowed the good seed in the field, and when he came back, he found tares. He let the tares grow, because the problem is, if you pull up the tares, you also pull up the wheat, and you destroy the wheat in the process. Let them grow together. It's not our job to separate. This sermon is not so you can judge others. It's so that you can judge yourself. Jesus did not give us a ministry of separation. He gave us a ministry of reconciliation. But we also need to be able to identify wolves when they come amongst the sheep. Shepherd, sheep, goats, and wolves. Now, I'm going to be very careful to go through this. Shepherds. In John 21, this is an interesting story. In John 21, Jesus appeared to his disciples for the third time after the resurrection. This is the time Jesus had been crucified. The disciples were all discouraged. Peter said, I'm going fishing, and he took a whole bunch of them off fishing with him. I think 7 of them went fishing, went back in the fishing business. Fished all night, had caught nothing. Daylight comes, there's someone standing on the shore. They do not identify him. And he says, did you catch anything? Catch any fish? No, fished all night, didn't catch anything. He said, cast your net on the other side of the boat. Well, what have we got to lose? Haven't caught anything all night. Threw the net over on the other side of the boat. The net was so full they could not bring it onto the boat. They recognized this is Jesus standing on the shore. Now, they come in. Peter, impetuous Peter, jumps off of the boat, swims over to the shore, because he recognized Jesus. The rest of them come in the boat, dragging the net behind them. And they find that Jesus has already prepared breakfast for them. He has fish on the fire. Now, remember, Simon Peter had denied Jesus. Jesus told him before the crucifixion, you'll deny me 3 times before the cock crows in the morning. Simon Peter denied Jesus 3 times. He lied, he denied, and he cursed. So they're sitting there eating breakfast, and Jesus looks over at Simon Peter and he said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, yes, Lord, I love you. He said, feed my lambs. A few minutes later, he looks at him again. He says, Peter, do you really love me? He said, yes, Lord, I love you. He said, feed my sheep. And then the 3rd time, he looks at him and he said, Peter, do you really love me more than these, more than what you're doing? Now then it dawns on Peter, whoa. I denied him, I lied, I cursed 3 times. And he's crushed and he says, Lord, you know all things. And you know how much I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now here is my point. Shepherd's job is to feed the sheep. In Acts 6, you may as well, Acts 6, Natalie, I'm putting you to the test. Acts 6. Just letting you know how much you ought to appreciate Natalie and what she does. Acts 6, verse 1. Church was growing. The number of the disciples multiplied, and suddenly there arose a murmuring. How many know that can happen? Because of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected. Everybody say neglected. Church, when a church is growing, look at me. When a church is growing, it's easy for someone to fall through the cracks and nobody know that they're having a problem. They feel neglected. That's why deacons are chosen. You hear me? Then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples and said to them, "Is not reason that we should leave the word of God and serve tables? Look out among you 7 men of honest report, full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word." The shepherd's job is what? Feed the sheep. Feed the sheep. Now, shepherds do not bear lambs. Sheep bear lambs. Now, shepherds are also sheep, so they have a right to bear lambs, but that's not their function. I don't know how pastors got involved in doing a lot of things that pastors do today, because that's not what God called them to do. Okay, hang on. I am not going to counsel everybody. I'm not going to visit everybody in the hospital. I'm not going to perform weddings. I'm not going to do funerals. I may do a few, but I'm not going to do many, and I may not do any. That's not my job. I will train people to do it, but that's not my job. I'm letting that soak in. My job is to feed the sheep. Now, the reason pastors fall into that, you can do all of that if you want to pastor 30, 40, 50 people. Maybe you could, if you're good, you might pastor 100 people. But if you're going to have a growing church, you cannot do it as a pastor, as a shepherd. The reason is because you get to the point where you cannot spend all of your time doing weddings, funerals, counseling, hospital visits, all of the other stuff. Because if you do, you won't have time to give yourself to the Word and to feeding the sheep. Now the problem is, if you do it for one, how do you tell the next one that you can't do it for them? Then you've got someone feels neglected. They feel like you don't love them. So the best thing is to spare you and me. Don't ask me. Everybody say amen. Amen. Now see, you know, it's not always easy to teach people the truth. I'm going to give you an example. You will love this. Have you ever been in a group of people and someone that you care for has a crusty on their nose? And it's visible. And everybody sort of shuns, stays away from them, and nobody will say anything. Why is everybody picking on their noses? Nobody wants to embarrass him and say, if you really loved him, would you just ease up and say, hey, brother, go check your nose. Can you say you love somebody if you're not willing to preach the truth to them? So when I tell you things like this sermon today, this is not a shout me down kind of sermon. But this will go to you, this will go with you to your grave if you will hear it and help you every day of your life. Whether you may get mad at me and leave, but when you go to the next pastor, you'll remember what I said. And you'll treat him better. Shepherds, sheep. Sheep love green pastures and still waters. They like things still, quiet, and calm. They don't like troubled waters. And goats. Goats, they're troublemakers. I'm going to confess. I get a little goaty sometimes. Goats like a little excitement. They want to stir things up. They'll run around and they'll kick and butt and jump around and agitate. Let's get something going. I mean, things are too quiet, too calm, too peaceful. I'm the same way. I can't help it. I get a little goaty sometimes. I don't like things too quiet, too calm, too peaceful. I have to stir something up. The church gets too quiet. Somebody pinch a baby. I mean, drop the Bible, make a racket, do something, get everybody's attention, stir things up a little bit. Goats are little troublemakers. Wolves. Wolves like the high places. They like elevated positions so that they can look down and see what they're going to be feeding on. Wolves are flesh eaters. And they're always looking for their next victim. Now, you don't feed sheep and goats the same way you feed wolves. Their diet is different. A sheep, his diet is different than a goat. And a goat and sheep's diet is different than a wolf. So you don't feed them the same. And you don't handle sheep and goats the same way you handle a wolf. You've got to be able to recognize who is who and what is what in the kingdom of God so you know how to feed them and how to deal with them. Sheep love green pastures. You know, when we come together on Sunday, this is your feeding ground. This is your pasture. You come together and the shepherd feeds the sheep. This is your feeding ground. Shepherd leads you into green pastures. And shepherds feed sheep. And true sheep, they can't stay away. True sheep, and the shepherd's going to feed them. And if they try to stay away too long, let me give you a secret. The trick of the enemy is to get sheep separated. The wolf wants to get one of the sheep separated. It doesn't matter what he's after. If he's after a caribou or deer or whatever, he wants to get one separated from the herd or the flock so that he can, because if he gets you separated, see, when you don't show up when it's feeding time, pastor knows there's a problem. Shepherd knows there's something wrong. If a sheep's not there when it's feeding time, he knows there's something going on. Say either the wolf's trying to get him separated, isolated. When you become separated and isolated, you become prey to the wolves. I like the song, by the way. It was a good song. Sheep like green pastures. Goats, they'll eat anything. You see goats, if there's a piece of paper, they'll eat a piece of paper. You'll just see them standing there chewing on a piece of paper. Chewing on, they'll eat it. Styrofoam cups, it don't matter. They'll eat weeds, briars, roots, brush. They would rather eat brush and roots than to eat grass. And goats don't like to stay put. They like to roam around. You've got to have a good fence to keep a goat. Anybody ever have goats? You better have a good fence or they will find a way to get out. Don't park a car in the yard if there's a goat there. It'll be all over your car. Yeah, if there's a stump that high out in the field, there'll be a goat standing on top of that stump. Just looking to see who he can agitate a little bit. And goats always want to get to the root of the matter. They'll dig up grass and eat the root. Goats, bless God, I'm going to get to the root of this matter. There's more to this story, and I'm going to find out what it is. They're always that way. Goats don't hurt the sheep. They're not meat eaters. They just run with the flock and agitate a little bit. Always trying to get to the root of the matter. Have you ever known somebody like that? You've never been there. None of them are here, of course. Now, as a shepherd, I have to understand that a goat is not going to act like a sheep. Goat's going to agitate. He's going to dig things up, try to get to the root of everything. And when the shepherd sees where a goat has been feeding, he knows the sheep didn't do that. They don't feed the same. Their diet is not the same. Sheep don't care about roots. That's not what they feed on. By the way, it's always the goats that wind up with a root of bitterness. Goats feed with the sheep, but they don't feed like the sheep. Sheep love green pastures. Goats would rather eat a briar than to eat grass. They'll stand and gnaw on an old blackberry briar. They'll just stand and gnaw on that thing. If you want to clear brush off your property, get some goats. They'll clean it up. And then there's wolves. Wolves are meat eaters. You can always tell a wolf, even if he looks like a sheep. If he's got on sheep's clothing, you can tell a wolf, just see what he's feeding on. See what he likes to eat. Wolf's not going to eat grass because the wolf is a flesh eater. He's a meat eater. And the wolf will be in the middle of every problem in the church. And they can always tell if there's a sheep that's weak or sick or vulnerable. Now, they may look like a sheep, but you just wait till it's feeding time and see what they're feeding on. And sheep, sheep can detect the wolf before the shepherd does. When there's a meat eater hanging around somewhere, sheep will know it. And they go to getting nervous, and they go to getting a little agitated, and they're moving around, and they got their head up in the air, and they're looking around because they know there's a meat eater hanging around. And true sheep will run to the shepherd because the sheep knows he can't protect himself. Now, I'm going to try to tie all this together in just a minute. I'll put it all together. Sheep love to be sheared. I love this part of the sermon. Sheep love to be sheared. They love to give. Sheep come in. Now, I have never raised sheep, but my brother did. And we would shear the sheep. We did it all. And sheep are interesting. Sheep come in, and they're all big and woolly and heavy, and they can hardly walk. And sheep, when it's shearing time, they are so big, they just look like a big ball of fur. Big ball of wool. That's all they are. They look like they're so fat they can hardly walk. And wool is heavy, by the way. And you get them sheared, you shear them, and you shear a sheep. You just pick a sheep up. And let me shear this black one. When you shear a sheep, you pick them up, and you just set them on their haunch, and you shear them. And they will just sit there. They'll just sit there. They won't even move. They just sit there while you shear the sheep. And when you shear that big old woolly thing, when you get through, he is just a little old skinny, scrawny thing. And when you turn him loose, I always got fascinated. As soon as you turned him loose, you set him back down, they will run and jump and kick up their heels. They just love to get rid of all that weight they've been carrying around. They have a time. Now, stay with me a minute. When that wool is long, heavy, full of oil, sheep get tangled in briars and brush or fences, and they get into real problems. That's how unsheared, woolly sheep get entangled in the cares of this world. Sheep love to give. There's only two commodities that a sheep has. I'm going to read you another verse. We're going to go to Proverbs, Natalie. Proverbs 27. We're going to look at verse 23 and 27. Proverbs 27, verse 23. Be diligent, know the state of your flocks, and look well to your herds. Just skip down to verse 26. Proverbs 27, 26. The lambs are for your clothing, and goats are the price of the field. Verse 27. Thou shalt have goat's milk, enough for thy food, and for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance or the food of all your maidens, all of your servants. Now sheep, stay with me a minute. Am I boring you? The goats, all the goats and wolves are getting a little bored right now. That was good, by the way. Sheep produce two commodities, wool and lambs. That's all they produce. A shepherd is supposed to shear the sheep to provide clothing for the house of God, that there be more than enough in the storehouse. Sheep love to give. When it's offering time, you watch the sheep. They light up. I get a chance to give. You know, when I was working on a job, I hadn't been saved all that long. I was welding. And you know, I used to think, boy, I'm working. This is God's hour. This is God's hour. A tenth of my time, a tenth of my work time, I dedicated totally to God. And I mean, in that hour, I would work harder than I worked any other hour of the day. I may take a break on the other hours, but I didn't take a break on God's time. I would work so hard. If I'd have worked all that time hard on all the hours, ain't no telling what I could have done. That was God's time. And when it was time to give, sheep love to give. Now, it's just part of the natural process. Shepherds shear the sheep, but you have to milk a goat. Now, goats are worth something. They provide milk, nourishment for the household. Milk those goats. But you watch a goat. Shepherd's going to take a special offering. And the goats, you just watch. You can just see it all over them. They just hate it. But you watch a goat, as much as he hates it, he just squirm around. It's a special offering time. He'll write a check and put something in the offering every time, but you got to milk him. Got to milk him. But he'll put something in the offering every time if you'll milk him. Sheep, they'll do it. It's offering time. If they think there's a need, they'll go put something on the table, or they'll give. If they just think there's a need. Goats, got to milk him. Now, you don't milk sheep and you don't shear goats unless it's Angora goats. Goats don't like to be sheared. But don't get your milking stool out or your shears out for a wolf. Because they don't give milk or wool. Wolves are not givers. Wolves are takers. Wolves destroy the flock. Wolves don't give anything. They just feed on the flock. And they feed on goats as well as sheep. And when a wolf is around, shepherd sees his flock coming in, limping, bleeding, some of them missing because a wolf been feeding on the flock. Now, wolves come in sheep's clothing. Jesus said in Matthew 7, verse 15, he said, beware of false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. They are deceptive. Wolves come in sheep's clothing. You can't tell a wolf by looking at him, because he'll dress up like a sheep. But watch him at feeding time. He feeds on flesh. He feeds on carnality. He feeds on gossip and envy and jealousy. He feeds on problems and troubles. He's a troublemaker. He will eat the sheep, and he'll eat the goats. Wolf sees a sheep that's weak, sick, vulnerable, and the modern way they do it, they take them out for coffee. So they can court them and lure them, and they can feed on the gossip, feed on the flesh, feed on the gossip, feed on the envy, feed on the jealousy. Wolves run in packs. They make their kill in packs. But they will fight each other over a chunk of meat. They get vicious after the kill. They have a pecking order. The alpha wolves will eat first, male and female. This is going to help you more as the days go on, I promise you. Wolves are meat eaters. They feed on flesh, carnality. Someone's mad at the pastor. Someone's mad at the deacons. Someone don't like the music. Someone's mad at the youth department, the youth leaders. They'll feed on that. And they'll try, oh, you feel the same way. I don't like what the deacons are doing. Oh, you feel the same way. Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, let's go have some coffee. Wolves gather to feed on the flesh. I Relax a minute. We're almost through. I had people in the church that I pastored. They did not like the youth pastor. I mean, they didn't like them, and they started gathering their pack. And they got 2 or 3 of them together, and a couple of them talked to me about it. Are you going to do anything about the youth pastor? I said, what do you want to do? Now, you know me. I'm so calm, easygoing. I let them talk. I said, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go help him? He needs some help. Why don't you go help him? I'm sure he would appreciate your counsel, your advice, and go help him out. Well, two of the alpha females in the wolf pack, they got together. And they went to see this youth pastor. It was around noon, and they went into his office, and he had his head laid over on the desk taking a nap. They went ballistic. They spread that around their pack. The whole pack was mad. What they didn't know is, when they came to me the second time, it was a mistake. What they didn't know is the youth pastor had spent the night at the hospital with a family who had a loved one who was dying. And instead of going home, he came home to church, to his office, to try to take care of some work, and he got tired and laid his head on. He didn't even have to come in. If I'd have known he was there, I'd have sent him home. And they come at me with that. It was not pretty. I sent a whole bunch of them to another church. I'm sorry. I don't shepherd wolves. I don't shepherd wolves. Whoa. I say, Pastor, can we lighten this up a little bit? A wolf is not a sheep and he's not a goat. He is not part of the flock. He feeds on the flock, and you cannot shepherd a wolf. Okay, now let's change gears. Every shepherd has a sheepdog. He can't shepherd the sheep by himself. He's got to have some sheepdogs that are well trained. They herd the sheep. They protect them. They guard them. They keep them all in the fold. Did you ever see a sheepdog work? How many have ever seen it? Television or something. It is something. I love to watch a good dog work. Any animal. I've raised horses, cows. I've had one of the best dogs that ever lived. I've had a guard dog. His name was Killer. He was something to behold. This was something to behold. But I had a border collie who was a trained cow dog. His name was Teddy. You talk about a dog that was amazing to watch. And people say dogs can't think or reason. Let me tell you a story. When I wanted to change the cows from one pasture to another, I would go to the gate. Teddy always went with me. Wherever I went, Teddy was there, right by my leg. I'd go open the gate, and I'd say, Teddy, out. He'd go round up the cows, bring them through the gate. I'd close the gate, and we'd go to the house. Now, at the time, I was running probably 75, 80 head of cows, several bulls, and a whole pasture full of calves. There was a lot of animals out there. Way too much for one dog to handle. I was going to change pastures. And I went to the gate. I opened the gate. I said, out, Teddy. He went out. In this particular pasture, there was a creek that ran down the middle of it, some little bit of trees and all. About half of the herd was on one side, and half of the herd was on the other side. He went down, he rounded up the bunch on this side, got them sort of all herded up together, headed towards the gate, went across the creek, rounded up the other side, got them headed. By then, the first bunch had scattered. Went back across the creek, herded all them up, bunched them up, headed them towards the gate. The other bunch had scattered. He did that back and forth across that creek. He did that 3 or 4 times, and finally he got so frustrated, he ran out about 100 yards down from me. He ran out, sat down, and looked at me. I got tickled. I didn't want him to know it, but I got tickled. He was looking at me, and I didn't know whether he was saying, "All right, stupid, are you going to help me? Can't you see I'm having a problem here? Tell me what to do." I said, "Teddy, out!" He sat there a minute. He looked at one bunch and then he looked at the other. He got up and he took off and he rounded up about 20 head. Brought that 20 head and put them through the gate. Went back. Got him another bunch, 15 or 20, put them through the gate, went back, and he did that. He would bring 10, 15, or 20 at a time, and he put every cow, every calf, and every bull through that gate. I closed the gate. I said, "Teddy, that'll do. That's what you tell a cow dog when he's finished, or a sheepdog. That's just when you're through, you say, that'll do." He come and got by my leg, put his head on my leg. I loved on him a little bit. I said, "That'll do, Teddy. Good job." And we went to the house. Now, listen. You're wondering, why am I preaching this sermon? Because we're going to have a deacon's election the end of the month. Deacons and elders are the sheepdogs. They protect the flock. They herd the flock. They keep the flock bunched together. A shepherd cannot do it without sheepdogs. Elders, I'm going to give you one more verse. We'll look at Timothy. 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy talks about elders and deacons. 1 Timothy chapter 3. Excuse me. Verse 1, 1 Timothy 3. I've preached longer than I intended to. Let me get through with this. Elders, man desire the office of a bishop or an elder. He desires a good work. Bishop must be blameless, husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Now deacons, talking about deacons, verse 7. He must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach in the snare of the devil. Likewise the deacons, that's verse 8, I'm sorry. Deacons grave, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding to the mystery of faith and pure conscience. Let these also first be proved. Let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. For they that have ministered, used or ministered the office of a deacon well, purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. Now, I will talk to our deacons about this in a little bit. our applicants. But these deacons, shepherds, must have sheepdogs. They must have people who are dedicated to the sheep. A sheepdog to a shepherd is priceless. But if a sheepdog ever gets the taste of blood and starts killing sheep, you can never break him of it. If he turns wolfy, if a sheepdog turns wolfy, you can't break him. You have to deal with him a little different. He is worthless, and he will eat sheep the rest of his life. You cannot break him. Now, are you a sheep? Do you love green pastures? You like still waters? Like things calm? Do you love to give? When it gets close to church time, feeding time, do you look forward to church? You look forward to it. I mean, pastures, but the shepherd's going to lead us into green pastures. We're going to feed today, and you get excited about it, and you get, during the week, you get down along about Friday or Saturday. Boy, only a couple of days I get to go back to church. I talked to a lady. She's here today. I won't embarrass her by calling her name. But she told me, I was talking with her one day, and she said, you know, I leave church. I may have told you this, but she said, I leave church depressed every week. Well, I got hurt. I thought, what is the matter? She said, I said, why do you leave depressed? She said, because it'll be a whole week before I get to come back. Are you a sheep or are you a goat? Like a little agitation, never satisfied to get in the fold, settle in, always trying to break out the fence, looking for a weak place in the fence. Do you give in your offerings, but you don't know why? Are you milked? Do you have to be milked? Are you always trying to get to the root of the matter? Always looking for greener pastures, another meeting to go to? Let me give you a word of caution. Let me give you a word of caution. And I really didn't intend to preach this long, but let me give you a word of caution. There's all kinds of voices out there today, church. They're on the internet, they're on television, and they're all trying to milk you. They have to milk you to keep the machinery oiled enough to keep going. And if they can get you on their mailing list, they'll bombard you week after week, constantly wanting money. And they lure you. They lure you. Oh, come and get the teaching of the ancients. Or something this, something that, something else. And they lure you little bit by little bit by little bit until they get you isolated where they can get their claws and their teeth in you. Just a word of caution. Are you a sheep? Are you a goat? Are you a wolf? Now, maybe there are no wolves here, but maybe you've been running with a wolf, and you got the little scar, a few scars on you, and you got the smell of wolf on you. You smell a little wolfy, and the sheep get nervous when you're around because they can smell the flesh eater. Wolves don't like preaching, especially if they preach as long as I've preached, 40 minutes. Long, anything over 20, 30 minutes, they really go to getting fidgety. They don't like the preaching. They get real fidgety. They can't stand it. But they'll stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning in a restaurant talking about what's wrong with the pastor, what they don't like about the church, what they don't like about the music, what they don't like about the youth, something. They'll stay up till 2 o'clock. But a 40-minute sermon, 50-minute sermon, they just get real itchy. They act like they got their horse tied to an ant bed. Wolves can't be milked or sheared. Wolves can't stand offerings or giving. Wolves don't tithe. I ought to quit. If you suspect somebody's wolfy, check the tithing record. First thing, you know the first thing that happens when someone gets mad at the pastor, they quit tithing. That's true. They quit supporting. Wolves don't tithe. And they have all kinds of excuses. Well, I give my tithes here, or I give to this, or I give to that. Or I buy stuff with my tithes that I can use for ministry. They're wolf. They may look like good sheep, but they're wolfy. Now, this is not a sermon so you can judge others. This is a sermon so you can judge yourself. Are you a sheep? Are you a goat? Are you a wolf? Let me ask you this. I'm through. How many of you ever had a little goat attitude rise up in you? Come on, raise your hand. I have to raise both of mine. I confess. There's some things about goat. I just get a little goaty. I like a little excitement. I don't want things too calm, quiet. How many of you ever had a little wolf attitude rise up in you a few times? Come on. Come on. We're all on the same. We all at the right place. See, when you see that, now then that you know, when that attitude rises up in you, you can say, oh, no, I'm a sheep. I'm not a goat. I am not a wolf. I'm a sheep. Because Jesus said, my sheep know my voice, and they follow me. I'm not a goat. I'm not a wolf. I'm a sheep. I will close with this. You know, if you're a sheep, you know, you recognize the shepherd that God has given you to. You know his voice, and you're not afraid to follow him. You know, I'm putting it this way, you know if this is the place God has called you to. And if he has, be a sheep. If this is where God's called you, be a sheep. And I'll be honored to be your shepherd.